So when we started with the chemotherapy, after they put the port in, a week later, she began her first chemotherapy. And the type of chemotherapy that she had to have is really aggressive. She was getting 2 different types of chemotherapy, and then she had to have another medication to help protect her bladder from the chemotherapy. And so she had to be put in the hospital. And it took about a week for her to have a full round of chemotherapy. She had to be in the hospital for a week. During that week, they had to wake her up every 2 hours to use the restroom, so that they were pumping her full of fluids, because the chemo that she was getting could cause damage to her bladder. And so they were pumping her full of things. And so the whole time she was in the hospital, the chemotherapy, the first time we went in, they brought in a menu and said, okay, you can have anything you want. We're not going to restrict your diet at all. And she looked at the menu and was so excited, because they had shakes and cake and, whatever. She ordered all this food, and she started eating the food, and then they started the chemo going. And she wasn't even halfway through, and she said, I can't eat any of this. I can't have any of it. She immediately started throwing up. And then it just continued that whole week. It was constant throwing up, having to be woken up every 2 hours. I stayed part of the time with her in the hospital. My mom actually came up from Mesa, and she would stay part of the time with her, because then I also had my other kids at home. And during all of the chemo and everything that she was going through there, I also was taking my other daughter out to Johns Hopkins for surgery, and had to stay out there for 8 weeks. So it was kind of a back and forth during this time. She had a really good teacher in school. She would miss the whole week of school because of chemo. And then when she would come home, depending on how her counts were, it would tell how her immune system was acting. And if her counts weren't good, she wasn't allowed to go to school, because then she could just catch anything. So for a week, she'd be in the hospital. A week after she came home, she would be at home on the couch and be getting constant blood draws and fluids and stuff at home on the couch. And then she'd have about a week that she would feel better and she would feel okay. And so for a week, she would go to school and be around all the other kids and have fun. And then it would start again. Right after that week, then she'd start another round of chemo. And we did that for 7 rounds. So it was about 6 months of straight chemo all through that time. When she had about 4 treatments of chemo, they took her in and did another MRI to see if the chemo was shrinking down the tumor at all. And at that time they said it hadn't shrunk, that the tumor wasn't going down, but that they wanted to continue with the chemo because, as the doctor explained, they wanted to kill any cells that could possibly have broken off that could be going other places. And so at that time he also said he was a sarcoma specialist, so he a surgeon, and so he had done lots of orthopedic surgeries. And at that time he actually talked to both me and her and said, it's a very high possibility that we're going to have to amputate your foot. And he said, it's kind of up to you. Do you want to keep doing chemo now, or would you rather do amputation and then finish chemo treatments? And so because she was in school still and she still wanted to be a kid and summer was starting to come up, she said, let's just get the chemo over and done with. And so we continued the chemo. At the end of the chemo, they went back and did the MRI again. And same thing, they said it doesn't look like it has changed. And so now they kind of left it up to her, because the surgeon actually said, I have taken care of kids that we tried to do an excision where we went in and cut out the tumor and tried to save things. Her tumor was growing on the tendon in her foot, and he said what will happen is we have to actually cut that whole tendon out, and so then you won't have control of your foot at all. Your foot will drop, and he said you won't be able to walk on your foot at all. He said we could try though. We can try to go in and we can cut it out, and he said we could do surgery after surgery and try to save it and see what we could do. Or he said, in my experience, you will end up with all these surgeries and still end up having to have an amputation. And she said, I'm done. Just amputate it. She says, let's just get rid of it so she could be cancer-free. And so a week after that, she scheduled the surgery and she went in, and that day, as soon as they cut it off, she was cancer-free. Because it was in her foot, she had been on crutches for a long time before that. And when they do an amputation, they can't just put a prosthetic on it right away. You have to wait for it to heal. And so she had the amputation in August. It wasn't until December that they actually started saying, okay, let's start getting ready to do a prosthetic. And so from August to December, most of that time she used arm crutches, and she could get around really good. For long distances, she had a wheelchair, and she would use the wheelchair. But we had videos of her jumping rope at recess on one foot, because she just became so good at doing everything with her one foot, and she would jump on the trampoline and go up and down the stairs and move around. She got to the point she didn't even like using her crutches. She just would hop everywhere, which I can't hop on my foot for that long. So she's just amazing. In December, she did get the prosthetic fitted, and it took about 4 to 5 weeks for her to actually get it. And then even after she had a prosthetic fitted, it took quite a long time for her to be able to walk without support. She still used the crutches for a long time. I think the motivation for her to get walking was that she did get Make-A-Wish trip because of the cancer. And we told her, if you're going to go on this trip, you've got to be walking. You don't want to have to be in a wheelchair. You won't be able to walk over to rides and things. And so I think that motivated her. And she did, by the time we went out in May of last year, she was walking around. She still did need a wheelchair for long distances because she does get tired and it hurts. She has had a few hiccups since then. She, with amputations, because she's still growing, she's a child, the bone still continues to grow, even though the leg isn't growing anymore. And so what happens is she's beginning to get bone growth on the bottom of the bones that are pushing on the bottom, where usually it would be a smooth round part that she could put her leg on. It's now getting these spurs that are causing pain. And so at some point they will have to go in and shave those off so that it's not causing pain anymore. But she's doing really well with getting around and being able to walk. She hasn't had a lot of phantom pain. She did have a lot at the beginning, and they gave her medications for that. But she seemed to work past that, and she doesn't have a lot of phantom pain. She does say that her foot itches sometimes, though, and she says, I've got to scratch my foot, and there's no foot there, so she kind of closes her eyes and pretends like she's scratching it. But she's pretty amazing. She's doing really well. She got cancer when she was 10. She had the amputation when she was, she began the chemo when she was 11. So I think she had just turned 12 towards the end when she had the amputation.